agricultural sector, which makes up around 17% of India's GDP, and farmers, which makes up 60% of India's total employed workforce, is the very root of our economy. But the very makers of these roots find themselves in trouble time and again. On 14 February 2024, Indian farmers have again decided to go on roads to agitate government for their demands. Same kind of protest we have seen in 2020 against farm bills. And these are not the only protests that have happened in Indian post-independence era. There have been other protests like this, and in this video we will analyze all the protests that have happened in post-independence India in a chronological order. So we begin in the 1960s, where echoes of colonial exploitation still rung loud. Farmers burdened by zamindari land laws rise up demanding land reforms. The reasons of 1960s agricultural protest were as follows. By the 1950s, India's population had significantly increased, putting pressure on limited resources and fueling demands for redistribution to improve agricultural productivity and food security. The rise of communist ideology in India, advocating for land reforms and equitable distribution of wealth, resonated with farmers and provided ideological support for their movements. One of the biggest reasons the 1960 land reforms were triggered was successful land reform initiative in some Indian states like Kerala and Andhra Pradesh. They served as inspiring examples and showed the rest of the Indian population that change is not that tough. The result of these protests turned out into the favor of farmers. They brought out the following life-saving outcomes for farmers. First was abolition of zamindari system. This was the most significant accomplishment of the protests, as it ended the exploitative practices of landlord and transferred land ownership to millions of tenant farmers. Second was increased land ownership for farmers. Millions of farmers received land titles, giving them greater control over their livelihood and improving their social and economic status. Third is increased agricultural production. By providing farmers with secure ownership and incentives, the reforms initially led to an increase in agricultural production, contributing to India's food security. Not just this, they had a positive impact on society as a whole. Social change. The reforms led to a shift in rural power dynamics, weakening the dominance of landlords and empowering farmers. This contributed to broader social changes and democratic process in rural India. Increased agricultural production and improved rural incomes had a positive impact on the overall Indian economy. However, disparities in land distribution and implementation challenges created limitations to long-term economic gains, and these issues resonated in the next protest in 1970s, which witnessed demands for minimum support price to ensure fair returns for their crops and loan waivers to break the shackles of ever-increasing debt. The main reasons of 1970 protest were as follows. The Green Revolution, initiated in the late 1960s, aimed to increase the agricultural production using high-yielding varieties, fertilizers and irrigation. However, it favored larger farmers with access to resources, further widening the gap between rich and poor farmers. Next was the 1970s saw oil price shocks and inflation, leading to a sharp increase in the cost of essential inputs like fertilizers and pesticides, squeezing the already tight margins of many farmers. And third was the government's MSP program, meant to ensure fair prices for crops, was often deemed inadequate and susceptible to manipulation. This fueled dissatisfaction and demands for better price guarantees. The demands of 1970s protest included higher MSP, debt relief, better access to inputs, and improved market infrastructure. And the main outcomes of the same were increased MSPs. The government raised MSPs for some crops, but farmers argued they still didn't reflect production cost. Some limited debt relief measures were implemented, but problem persisted. And some efforts were made to improve storage facilities and marketing channels, but progress was slow. As India was welcoming globalization in the 1990s, new anxieties take root. Farmers fear the onslaught of corporate control, unfair market practices, and dwindling access to essential resources. Their protest become a shield against the perceived erosion of their traditional way of life. The main reasons for 1990s farmer protests were as follows. First was globalization. The Indian government's economic reforms in the 1990s, embracing the globalization and liberalization, aiming to integrate the Indian economy with the global market. However, farmers feared these reforms would expose them to unfair competition from the international markets and corporate players. Second was the reduction of trade barriers. Removal of import restrictions on agricultural products worried farmers, fearing they would be flooded by cheaper imports, lowering domestic prices and squeezing their income. Next is disinvestment in public sector agriculture. Reduced government support for irrigation projects, subsidies, and extension services created anxieties about their access to essential resources and expertise. Also, the 1990s saw several significant farmer movements, including Bharatiya Kisan Union. Led by Mahendra Singh Tikait, this union spearheaded protests in northern India, demanding better MSPs and loan waivers. Second was Shetkari Sangathan. This Maharashtra-based movement, led by Sharad Joshi, focused on empowering farmers through cooperatives and market forums. Third was National Farmers Forum. This umbrella organization brought together various farmers' unions across India to advocate for policy changes. And the result of 1990s protests were also a mixed bag of happiness and dissatisfaction for farmers. While the protests did not achieve all their demands, they achieved some of the key outcomes, which were increased awareness. They brought out national attention to the plight of farmers. Second was improved MSPs. The government raised MSPs for some crops, although farmers argued they remained inadequate. Next is policy debates. These protests sparked critical discussion about agricultural policy, highlighting the need for reforms to address market access, infrastructure, and farmer welfare. And next is empowerment and solidarity. The movements helped empower farmers, strengthen the farmers' organization, and foster solidarity among diverse groups. In 2020, a wave of dissent swept across India's agricultural heartland. Farmers, their faces etched with determination, took to the streets, their cries echoing across the nation. But what ignited the fire? What were the seeds of discord that blossomed into the historic protest? 3 laws, the farm bills, became the flashpoint. Farmers saw these as threats to their livelihoods, dismantling protections and paving the way for corporate control. Abolition of mandis, minimum support prices, and essential commodity acts. Each provision fueled anxiety and anger. The government defended the bills, claiming they would modernize the agriculture and benefit farmers. Negotiation faltered. Tempers flared and months of protest carried on. Delhi's border became a battleground where farmers braved harsh weather and unwavering resolve. The protest resonated deeply, impacting daily life and the national economy. Food prices fluctuated, supply chains strained, and the world watched holding their breath. Could India's democratic fabric withstand this pressure? After months of struggle, a dramatic turn happened. The bills were repealed. A victory, yes, but not an end. Experts warn that deeper issues linger. Fair pricing, sustainable income, and access to resources. Reforms are urgent need to avoid the future harvest of discontent. The 2020s farmer protest stand as a testament to their resilience and their fight for a dignified livelihood. Their struggle is not just for themselves, but for the future of India's food security and rural prosperity. And to share the same concern, they are out on the roads again. And this time, the issue is the delay in the application of promises made by the government, which actually resulted in winding up of protests. We must listen to their voices, understand their anxieties, and work towards solutions that empower them, not just appease them. For the seeds of discord, if nurtured with empathy and action, can blossom into a harvest of shared prosperity for all.